Hello, everybody. It's Colin Ellis here, and welcome to the Culture and Coffee podcast for Monday, the 20th of December 2021. We made it. We made it to the end of the year. I don't know about you, but I'm physically and emotionally spent. This has been one of the tough. Just when you thought like 2020 was a bad year, and it was on so many levels, it was a bad year, then along rolls 2021. And we learned so much more about ourselves and all of that stuff. And yeah, well, we made it, I suppose. I hope you're taking a break this Christmas. I'm actually going to practice what I preach. I'm usually rubbish at taking a break, I'll be honest with you. Like for me, taking a break is I'll stop doing stuff for 3 days and then I'll feel guilty and feel like I should be doing something, and then, start doing things all over again. It's a time for me just to I don't really watch much TV during the year. It's not really my thing. I don't get time to read books during the day necessarily, but at Christmas, that's what I'll do. I'll just be like, right, I watched The Wizard of Oz yesterday. I don't know why it's a Christmas movie. Like when I was a kid, I used to watch Wizard of Oz at Christmas. Like it's the scariest thing as a kid. But yeah, so I watched Wizard of Oz and that was good. But yeah, I'll read book. I've got like loads of books to read, which I'm really looking forward to. But some of them are business books, so I'll end up kind of reading, and making notes and stimulating thinking, which is all good. It's all good. I've got some research papers to read as well, of course I have. So I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take a couple of weeks off. 2 or 3 weeks. We'll see how it goes. So this will be the final podcast of the year while I'll take a break. And I'm going to talk about kind of the culture year in review. So I'm quite excited about this one because, I went back and had a look at some of the things that happened during 2021 and particularly some of the trends that we were expecting in 2021 after 2020. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. This week's coffee, by the way, is a Lanarco Rodriguez Ospina from Colombia, which is roasted by Campos Coffee. Campos Coffee was started by Will Young in Newtown in New South Wales in 2002. And if you ever go, like if you're ever in Sydney, kind of head to Newtown, it's a suburb, and find the Campos coffee shop there. There's a little coffee shop there. It's so cool. So I've been, and I think when I went, I had a pour over, which if you don't know what a pour over is, you're going to have to go back and listen to previous episodes. But how lucky are you over Christmas? So I did that. I hung out, and I think there was I think I sat in the window. There's a little coffee bar in the window. Anyway, it was really, really cool. So the coffee has notes of peach and pineapple and is a pink bourbon varietal. So sometimes on the front of the beans, it will say what kind of varietal it is. So this particular one is pink bourbon. Now, for those of you who like to understand coffee varieties, the pink bourbon is quite rare. It's really only found in Colombia, funnily enough. I mean, the cherries themselves are pink in colour, hence the name, but they're really difficult to cultivate and grow because farmers have to isolate the crops because the bourbon cherry is really, really susceptible to disease. So they have to kind of isolate them and grow them separately. And then the coffee pickers can only pick them when they're pink. So it has to be just right. I mean, it's a miracle at all, to be honest, that they make it to the cup. But it's worth it because it's absolutely delicious. I'm just going to have a taste here. That is just so smooth and delicious. Definitely getting the notes of the pineapple there. Now, my friend Richard Corney. Now, Richard is one of the founders of Flight Coffee in New Zealand. He had a piece published in the press in New Zealand. I think it was 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, where he was talking about an increase in the price of coffee and how the cost of everything goes up, but not coffee, which I thought was a really interesting piece. I've never really thought about it. Now, having owned a coffee shop, we know that there's no money to be made in coffee, or that was part of that was just the thing that you accepted. is you made no money in coffee, but you make your markup in food. And he was arguing, I think he said, we're paying $7.50 for a cup of coffee. And, of course, like I have a rule, don't read the comments. Like if you ever read an article, just have a rule, don't read the comments. And of course, it was just nothing but vitriol and hatred. And well, I won't be shopping there. I won't be buying my coffee there. But, I think he's right. Yeah. I've been reading, and I mentioned this on the podcast, I've been reading Paul Theroux's book, The Old Patagonian Express, which I'm absolutely loving. I'm going to be so sad when I finish reading it, although I do need to finish it because I feel like I've been reading it for months. And he's been going through Central America. So he's been going through Costa Rica, Guatemala, and he's just gone through Colombia, ironically, and he's talking about coffee picking. And, since I started this podcast, you really get to understand what's involved in the process. So it's not only the farmer growing the crops, it's then managing the crops. It's then paying the coffee pickers to pick the cherries. Then they're left out to dry, then they're kind of harvested and bagged, and then they're flown over, and then they're roasted and by the coffee shop, and then a barista's paid to kind of make your coffee. It's kind of nuts that the price of a cup of coffee, certainly here in Australia, it hasn't gone up. It's like $4.50. Now I'll always pay for good coffee. When you look at the price of wine, you look at the price of beer, that they've all gone up. You look at the price of fuel, it goes up. Now, obviously, coffee is slightly different, but everything, the cost of everything goes up. So it's kind of ridiculous that the price of coffee hasn't gone up. So I'm with Richard. I think, it's important to support our local businesses. So just if the price of your coffee goes up, just think about what's gone into it. Because, the cost of wages has gone up. Nobody can get staff at the minute. It's one of the big issues we're seeing around the world, which I may talk about. So, of course, the cost to hire has gone up as well. Anyway, so Campos coffee, absolutely delicious, pink bourbon, end of. I'm going to be drinking a bit of coffee over Christmas. Also, I'm going to be drinking a bit of whiskey. So this is my time just to relax. I said I was going to do a coffee and whiskey, culture and whiskey podcast, but I never got around to doing that. So my favourite whiskey, by the way, is a Kilchoman Macir Bay, Machr, Kilchoman Macir Bay. It's a peated whiskey from the Isle of Islay, and it's delicious. All right, let's talk about 2021. It was a bit of a bonkers year in the world of work, and I think we've learned a lot about ourselves. We've learned a lot about the world of work. Not a lot has changed. I think we've talked a lot, but not a lot has changed. And if I'm honest, we're on the verge of going back to where we were before. I think many organizations, many senior managers, have talked a really good game, particularly with regards to hybrid. So if you look at 2020, right? So 2020, when the pandemic first hit, we kind of implemented Microsoft Teams, implemented Zoom, and everyone went remote, right? So that was the thing. We all went and did remote working because we were under public health orders, right? Public health orders basically said, if you can work at home, you must work from home. And so organizations were forced into this position where remote working was suddenly okay, where previously you had to fill in the flexible working thing, and you still have to do that, right? I'll come to that in a second. But, we kind of, everyone was working remote. And so the emphasis then was on making sure everybody was okay. This was 2020, making sure everyone was okay. We understood the public health advice and we're doing the right thing. So fast forward to 2021, Melbourne particularly, Melbourne, the most locked down city in the world. Melburnians have done it really, really tough, really tough. If you're a citizen of Victoria, you're on the call. I feel your pain this year. It has been brutal being locked down like we have, but we've had to adapt, right? We've had to adapt, and God knows what 2022 is going to throw at us. We've had to adapt. But what we saw when we came out of lockdown, particularly in Australia, New Zealand, who didn't really go into any big lockdown other than Auckland, who had it tough at the end of the year, is the balance of employee-employer power shifted, because employers were saying, actually, we've proved this working from home, remote working thing can work. we now want hybrid work arrangements. So I think the first thing that we saw that is leaders are still a little bit out of step and a little bit out of touch to what employees want. Not only that, they're out of step with what hybrid working is. And we've seen that consistently throughout the year. Leaders have kind of said, we're going to be hybrid moving forward. We're going to offer hybrid work. But then as soon as workplaces started to open, they were like, actually, we just want to call people back to the office. And it's not that it's wrong. It's just that so many organizations made these bold statements about being hybrid. They kind of put themselves into a bit of a corner, I would say. So, as I've talked about before, hybrid work is really an ad hoc arrangement that you make with your manager at the start of the week about where work needs to take place. And it requires a high level of organizational and personal maturity to get there. And of course you can do it. And it's a great model, having worked hybrid. It's a fabulous model because trust is assumed. Trust is assumed. Everyone's the best version of themselves. We get our work done. It's great. It's a great model. The hybrid work model is great, but it's not for everybody, and it's not for every organization. And you've kind of got this mix of desk-bound and deskless work, which I'll come to in a second. So I think leaders are still a little bit out of touch. I think so. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is that employees, so if you're an employee, you have to make sure that you're not asking for your cake and then eating it as well. Because what we've got is people saying, I don't want to come back to the office. Well, so tough. I know that sounds brutal, but there is just some work that's better done face to face. And it will always be that way. As human beings, we're hardwired to work face to face. I think I mentioned on the podcast before, I had a lady ask me when I was doing a speech, and often you get questions at the end. It's a virtual speech, and she said, I don't want to come back to the office. What should I do? I said, now's the time to go and work for yourself. I was serious. I was like, if you don't want to go back to an office, then go and work. Unless your organization is going 100% remote, which I doubt, then, follow your passion. What's the thing that you're really excited about? Go set up the business. And that's what we're seeing at the minute with the Great Resignation as it's being billed. The Great Resignation, it began as the Great Intention to resign. It wasn't like swathes of people were actually doing it. But it was the Great Intention to resign. Now, the phrase itself was coined by a guy called Anthony Klotz. Now, Anthony Klotz is an associate professor of management at Texas A&M University. He did an interview with Bloomberg back in, I think it was May, about turnover and what we're expected to see. And he said what we saw in 2020 was nobody left their job because there was so much uncertainty. Everybody stayed. And here in Australia, we had the lowest attrition rate ever in the year to February 2021. He said, but what we see once crisis starts to subside is people start to move. And that's what we're seeing now. So yeah, Anthony Klotz is to blame for the Great Resignation. So we're starting to see people really question their organization's values, question their own intentions, kind of look at themselves and go, should I have stayed at university? So we're seeing people going back to school. So all of these things, which we've seen, and what binds people to organizations more than anything, as you know, listening to this podcast, is culture. So I'm talking to organizations about not making any snap decisions, about kind of paying silly money to people because the candidate market is short at the minute. It's kind of putting the time and effort into building a great culture and building a pipeline of people. For those of you who read my blog, this is something that I wrote. I said, forget the Great Resignation, really focus on the Great Attraction. What you want to do is build a culture that attracts the kind of people that you're looking for. And I don't think enough people are doing this yet. There's still a lot of panic about the Great Resignation. And so what organizations are doing are making really kind of, do I say dumb? can I say? It's my podcast, I'll say whatever the hell I want. With kind of dumb decisions about paying 30, 40 grand more for a role that they wouldn't ordinarily. And then employees are making short-term decisions by chasing the dollar without asking, what kind of culture do you have? What prospects for promotion do I have? What are your work arrangements? What does the future look like? All of those things. And so I think, if you're questioning whether you want to be with the same organization next year, the grass isn't always necessarily greener. But what would be your terms for staying? Other than money, right? Money aside, what does good look like? Because one of the things I'm urging everybody to do in order to start 2022 in the right way is to start with team building activity. Start by defining your culture. Now, it's very easy for you to be cynical here and say, but of course, Colin, that's what you do. Why would you not tell us to do that? Like for 2 hours, 3 hours, half a day, 1 day, for big teams, 2 days. Why wouldn't you start by defining your culture? Why wouldn't you? Because one of the things we saw in 2021 is people tried to do it too late. The organizations that thrived during COVID, or at least made it through, were the ones who put time and effort into building and defining the culture that they need to be successful. Going into 2022, there's still a whole great deal of uncertainty. There's still a lot we don't know. There are still new variants with different names, and we're not sure whether to be afraid of them or not. Obviously, the press is pushing the line to be afraid of them. Of course they are, because advertising sells. Cynical view of the press. But, we're still going to go into with uncertainty. So why would you not provide your team with the certainty of this is the culture that you're part of? People are exhausted. People are absolutely knackered. We saw lots of presenteeism in 2021. We saw lots of people working too hard. And I think people are over that now. I think organizations have burned a lot of emotional capital. They didn't take the opportunity to challenge some of the cultural norms that they had. They didn't take the time to challenge back-to-back meetings and too many emails and, poor prioritization and poor planning, additive cultures where we add, and we never take anything away. All of those things, you had the opportunity to challenge all of those things. Starting a new calendar year is an opportunity to do all of that. So when I look back at 2021, just not enough was done to build the right kind of cultures in order for you to be successful. I think the other thing, just going back to hybrid working, one of the things we saw in India, were hit pretty hard by the virus, much like every organization has been. Some of the big tech companies there, what you saw is them basically saying, "Oh, we're gonna be hybrid working. We're gonna, like, at least 20% of the organization, we're gonna be working hybrid." And then when they could call back people back into the office, that's exactly what they did. They just called them straight back into the office, and people were outraged about this. Said, "You said we were going to be hybrid working." And they were like, "Oh yeah, but we need to bring you back first while we figure it out." And I don't think that's wrong. Controversially, somebody said to me, "Oh, but if hybrid work is to say, why would we not just go and do it?" And the point that I made was that most individuals don't know what hybrid work is, and they don't know what they want. You've got people who are saying, "Oh, I want to work from home Monday to Friday." Well, that's not hybrid work. Also, there's got to be good reason why you want to work from home kind of Monday and Friday. If collaborative work means that you might actually be needed in the office on a Friday to work with your team. Are you making this all about you? Now, of course, if you've got young children, if you've got elderly parents to look after, if there's a circumstantial need, then that's flexible working. So you need to apply for flexible working anyway. I've talked about this. So one of the things that we saw towards the end of 2021 now is almost these two tracks that could potentially open. So we've dealt with things like gender pay and equity by having everybody in the same space. And when you've not got everybody in the same space, then, there's a real opportunity for proximity bias, which leads to these two-track workforce. Proximity bias is basically, I'm going to favor the people that I can see. And so if you're a manager, you have to be really, really careful in 2022 and beyond about how you treat people who are in the office compared to how you treat people who aren't in the office. Because there's very much an out of sight, out of mind mentality when it comes to office-based work. So we've seen this towards the end of 2021. You really have to think carefully if you're a people leader, and if you're in HR, you really have to think very, very carefully about what this mix of hybrid versus non-hybrid work looks like, whilst also recognizing that you have people who just can never work hybrid. Now, hybrid work, it's a reality that every organization has to face, but it's office privilege. Almost 80%. I read a paper by Josh Bersin. They call it, kind of desk-bound versus deskless work. It's a really, really, really interesting paper. And the point that he made is that up to 80% of the workforce are deskless. So when we talk about hybrid work, you're only talking about 20% of the world's workforce. It's a tiny proportion. And so you have to design the hybrid workforce, so the desk-bound workforce and the deskless workforce at the same time, to make sure that there's parity. And so this is where there's this, it's a real minefield. So bringing people back to the office isn't a bad thing. You have to make sure you're doing it in line with public health advice. You have to make sure that you're dealing with people empathetically. If you're on here and you feel like you're anxious about it, what is it that's causing the anxiety? If the organization's following the rules, what's causing the anxiety? And you have to talk openly about those so that you can be reassured that it's a safe place to go back to work. So it's been a fascinating year. It's not without its challenges, its cultural challenges, and unfortunately, 2020 was a year of great empathy, and we've seen that erode during 2022 as we've become more tired and exhausted. These are just excuses, because we've seen poor behaviour come back. I think there was lots and lots of empathy, but we're now seeing poor behaviour coming back into organisations, and people using the pandemic and we just need to get back to normal. We just need to get everyone back in the office. This wouldn't happen if we were all in the office. All of these kinds of things. There are many, many organisations that made the front pages, not least the Australian government, when it came to workplace culture and the steps that it needs to take. There's nothing shines a light on poor culture like a crisis. And so many organizations have seen what they have to do moving forward. Managers moving forward, what's required of you is greater empathy. That's one of the things that we saw in middle of the year, is that employees are looking for greater empathy. They're not necessarily looking to work from home all of the time. I think that's a kind of mistaken notion that people have, but they are looking for flexibility of working where it's possible. Mostly what people want, more than anything else, is the opportunity to bring the best self to work wherever it is and to feel productive. People are over the never-ending meetings, the never-ending emails. People are over all of that. And I think if organizationally, if you're a manager listening to this, you can create a team that just gets the job done, doesn't feel overworked, feels just enough stretched so that they're able to grow, feels like you put time and effort into planning, feels like they're connected to something bigger than themselves, that has a real sense of belonging, then you're going to go into 2022 with this real commitment to do great work. And so as we end 2021 and you make decisions for 2022, think about, how do you co-design the culture that you need to do all of those things to be successful in 2022? How do you challenge some of those cultural norms that continue to hold you back? How do you work with your colleagues to create something that's exciting, to create something that's productive, and to create something that you want to return to every day? Thank you so much for listening to this podcast wherever you are in the world. As I mentioned at the start, I'm going to take a break for a few weeks and I'll be back with way more energy, so look out for that in the new year. If you celebrate the holidays, happy holidays. Otherwise, if you're taking a break, enjoy it, and I will speak to you in January. Ta-ra for now.